Thank you so much, Vitaly. Thank you, everybody. I'm super happy to be up on the stage today to talk to you about creating smart layout patterns with modern CSS. And especially early this morning, we had lots of talks about AI, and you might be wondering, is that why I'm talking about smart layout patterns? But as some people will be happy to know, and some people will be disappointed to know, we're not here yet. Maybe one day, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. But before we talk about what I mean by smart layout patterns, first I want to talk just a little bit about modern CSS. Because as Vitaly said, there's so much happening with CSS these days. It's incredible, really, right? It's just this really fast pace of change that's going on. And if I was giving this talk just a few years ago, you might have thought that I would just be talking about using Flexbox and Grid, and that would be the focus of the talk. These days, though, it could mean so much more. This was a really quick list I threw together last night when I thought of adding this slide, and I'm missing a whole bunch of really cool things that are on it. If you don't know any of them, I would recommend looking up the has selector, look up anchor positioning. I didn't even add it on here, scroll-driven animations. Anchor positioning, I think a lot of people here would be really excited about, so if you haven't seen it yet, you can go and dive in and look at that. What I want to talk about today, though, is something that or actually, before we get to that, one of the good reasons that so much is happening in CSS, as we mentioned, I have a YouTube channel. Yeah, I'm at 840 videos right now, and I'd say 820 of those are about CSS. And despite that, I really don't have a shortage of topics. People have asked me if I think I'm going to start talking about something else just because I'm getting bored, and it's actually the opposite. I can't even decide what I'm going to be talking about next because there's so many things that I'm excited by. And what I want to talk to you about today is something that I've already talked about quite a bit, which is container queries. Container queries, I don't just want to talk to you about them and say they're awesome. I actually want to bring you along on my journey where I fell in love with container queries the minute I heard about them and I started playing with them. Then I sort of fell out of love with them. I didn't like them so much. I wasn't really finding any good use cases for them the way I thought I would. And then eventually I actually rediscovered that they're really awesome. So for any of you who've actually used them so far and you didn't really find the use cases you thought, hopefully I can help you fall back in love with them. And for anyone who hasn't used them yet, you get to skip those first two steps and just see the good stuff of them. Really quickly, just so we're all on the same page of what a container query even is, let's look at a really quick example. And we're going to compare it to a container media query, because most people are familiar with those. So I've set up this layout. This is the first demo, I think the first demo I ever set up using container queries. The first time I played with it, I had to update this CodePen with new syntax, because when I made this, the syntax hadn't been finished yet. And I did this right now with a media query, where when we switch the screen size, you can see I hit a breakpoint of 750 pixels. And at that size, the layout shifts. The image goes to the side instead of being stacked on top. And I'm just doing that by changing a flex direction of row there. If you want to do this with a container query, it's pretty easy. You keep almost everything the same, but you put @container instead. But you get a little bit underwhelmed. We're going to change the size here as well. But you get a little bit underwhelmed when you do that because it doesn't actually work right away. There's one limitation to container queries, and that's that you need a defined container. So I'm going to add a red dotted outline around here just so we can really visualize what the containers are. So on all of these, I have a card. Right there, you can see the article is the card, and then inside of there, I have the card layout. So the container is the dotted line, and then the layout is the piece inside that I'm manipulating. And you can already see now the cards on the top are different from the cards on the bottom. For designers, this could be, we moved into this component-based world, and this is what we wanted. This is a feature that we wanted for a really long time, and we finally got it, where the layout can depend on the space available. So those cards on the top are switching because they have 300 pixels, the ones on the bottom don't. And then when we get to a larger size, eventually they switch over too. This was something we were told was impossible for a long time. It was at the top of the list of features that people wanted in CSS. And the browser engineers kept telling us it's impossible. But they're actually really smart people, and they eventually figured out how to do it. They gave it to us. People like me got extremely excited. We got other people excited. And then once they finally got to a point, because they have over 90% browser support right now, they're available in all the major browser engines, no one really started using them. which was kind of disappointing. It was sad to not see them being used anywhere, but I went through this too. I had a playlist of videos looking at all the really cool things you can do with them, and then I started struggling myself in finding use cases for them, and of course, then you have to start wondering why. And this was a question that started coming up a lot in the CSS circles, maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, somewhere around there, where people that are really into CSS were talking a lot about it and wondering why. Chris Coyer wrote a blog post on it. In his post, he said that he thought once they came in, that 75% of the use cases for media queries would be replaced by container queries, and clearly that didn't happen. And he brought up some good points in this article about why. There was a lot of social media back and forth and different ideas that were going around. One of the things that came up a lot was some of the limitations around them. So one of those limitations you sort of saw already, where I had to add a container. I had to define a container. And one of those, because we have to define the container, we'd run into situations like this, where I have an intrinsic layout. So an intrinsic layout is a term coined by Jen Simmons, where it's a layout where it changes, it adapts to the browser without the need of media queries, which is really awesome. I'm doing this down here just with 3 lines of CSS. The important one is this grid template columns. It's a really long declaration, but it gets the job done, and basically I'm saying the smallest the column can be is 225 pixels. If the browser can fit more, it squeezes more in, and it squeezes another, and it squeezes another. This is super useful and a really great pattern to use, but the problem is I don't really have a solid breakpoint that I could use. If I wanted to do this with a media query, it would be just a magic number that I'd have to come up with, and it would be really, really fragile. And it felt like container queries should be able to do some stuff with this. But let's say this one that I have the border on right now, if I wanted that to stretch across 2 columns at one point, I can't do that. And it's really frustrating. So over here, I tried doing it, where I have a defined container, and then I'm using a bit of modern CSS there with card has image. So the card that has the image should change and span across 2 columns. But it never actually reaches this width of 100 pixels, because as soon as there's enough room, the layout shifts. So it never hits that point, and I can't really have this contained thing that's looking outside of that, and I can't switch this over to being the card container either, which is actually what I need to do in this case, because the card is inside of the card container. This isn't going to work because a media query can't query itself. This would break your browser. It's just impossible. So you can't look at the size of the element itself. You have to look at the size of other things. You can see doing that actually caused some weird stuff to happen, but I think that's because I have another media query or container query set up in another spot. And it started causing, actually I did have something down there that was causing, sorry about that. I think on my main, I thought I deleted that before I did this demo. There we go. Normally, when you would say the span 2, it wouldn't actually work when you had this as, let's do it again, card container, and it doesn't work. And that becomes frustrating when you can't query your own size, because then if you can't query your own size, a lot of the things that we'd want to do actually start falling apart. And it felt like this limitation that was preventing us from really taking advantage of all those situations that everyone was envisioning when we thought we were getting container queries. The problem is not container queries, it's that we've been using the container queries wrong. It's not your fault you've been using them wrong. Maybe it's my fault because I put out all those videos and then I didn't show you the cool stuff you could do, but I couldn't figure it out either. I'm not smart enough, I guess. But I wouldn't say it's really anybody's fault. I'd say it's something's fault. And if I'm going to blame anybody or anything, it would be the media query. Not that there's anything wrong with media queries. Media queries shape the web we have today. And if we didn't have media queries, then we would have run into a lot of problems along the way. Modern web wouldn't exist the way it does. It'd be really hard to make responsive layouts. Speaking of which, this is the article by Ethan Marcotte from 2010 where he coined the term responsive web design. It's almost 15 years ago. And a big part of what he talked about in this article was using media queries to create responsive websites. We've been using media queries for a really, really long time at this point. And because we've been using them for so long, we've gotten used to the pattern of how a media query works. Right? We understand how it works, we understand the limitations of it, and we've gotten really good at creating different things with them. And when we look at a container query compared to a media query, it's just like the funhouse equivalent, right? They sort of look the same. They look a little bit different because the word is different there. But more or less, the syntax is the same. Everything else is the same. The only difference is a media query looks at the viewport. So it's evaluating, is the width greater or smaller than whatever number you put there? Usually it's pixels. Sometimes you might use M or rem. Whereas with a container query, we're doing the exact same thing, but we're looking at the size of the container instead of looking at the size of the viewport. Sort of the same thing. This is how we've been trained to use them, because that's how media queries work, and it's the only way that we can use media queries. But it wasn't until recently that I discovered there's actually more that you can do with container queries, and a lot more that's possible, and it opens up these smarter layouts that we can create. We can lean much more into intrinsic designs and building out sort of new intrinsic patterns, and also working with intrinsic designs and following the breakpoints that they're actually creating. And it's really, really exciting. I wish I could say that I was smart enough to have that light bulb moment and discover that how this works, but it was all because of a blog post, actually. This is a blog post by Andy Bell on his Piccalilli website. It's from about a year ago, actually, which surprises me. If you don't know Andy Bell and his Piccalilli website, if you're really into front-end development, I would strongly encourage you to go and check it out. It's a very good resource, and it looks good. He just recently redesigned it. In this blog post, he was looking at taking this dribble design and making it into a responsive website. It's a very in-depth post. It's really, really good. I'd encourage you to check it out. If you don't like seeing scrolling screens, just maybe look away for a second. I'll let you know when I'm done, because I'm going to scroll a lot right now. Because it was a really good post, as I said, really in-depth. Lots of really good information, lots of interactive examples you can play with along the way as you're going through it. And then it wasn't until right here that I got to the part, and I stopped scrolling now if you weren't looking. When I got to this point right here where I discovered something and it stopped me, and I went, wait a second. Now, if you're going to come to this article and read it, read the whole thing. Don't skip to this part. It is a good article, like I said. But the really important part here was this that he did. At container greater than 60 VW, just so you know, you can use the greater than, less than symbols now. It's called the range syntax. You can do that in media queries too. Support's pretty good. So width greater than 70 VW. That looks really weird, right? Because you would never do that with a media query. In this slide, I'm saying that it's kind of useless. It's not kind of useless. It's totally useless. Of course, our media, which is the viewport, is always bigger than 70 VW. It doesn't make any sense there. Once again, media query looks at, it evaluates, is the width greater or smaller than a certain number? Container queries evaluate if the width is greater or smaller than a certain number. Nothing too fancy, but when we use viewport units there, we've done something different. All of a sudden, we're querying two different things. This might not seem like a big deal, but it's a really big deal. Because now I'm comparing the width of one thing to the width of another thing, and both of those things can be changing sizes. And that opens up some really interesting possibilities. So if we look, I made a very simplified example of what Andy did. The design is terrible. I apologize to all the designers in the audience. I have a simple two-column layout. The two-column layout is getting created here, just with a media query where I'm using grid to make two columns. There's really nothing too fancy, so if I'm greater than 720 pixels, I have two columns. And if I shrink this down, they stack. And we get a giant image that fills up my entire viewport, and the user just leaves because they think your website's broken. We don't want this to happen. So this is what, I'm doing an exaggerated example now. I'm going to crop my image a lot. You don't do this necessarily, because then you're serving up a giant image for no reason, but just it highlights really well why this works. So in my HTML, at the top here, we have the split. I have an adaptable image div with an image inside of it, and then I have my article with all the content in it after that. So what we can do is, let's go bigger for a second, we can bring in a container query that uses that 70 VW trick right here. And when I do that, now, when I get smaller, all of a sudden that adaptable image is taking up the full viewport width. So it's now larger. Even though the screen size got smaller because it's stacked, it got bigger, it hits that point, and now all of a sudden we can do some other styling and we can fix our layout and make it a little bit better. And you might be wondering, couldn't I just do this inside of the media query at the very top of the page that I had there? And I could do this for this one specific use case, obviously. But generally speaking, if we're doing something for one specific use case, it's kind of crappy. In this case, it would be working for this one specific breakpoint and nothing else. I could change this number and it would work. But I could also bring in and use this in other situations. So for example, down here, I could bring in some extra columns of content at the bottom. I'm using the adaptable image in these as well. And I'm using Flexbox for this. So if I come and take a look, I don't know when the breakpoint is going to happen here. Let's just go down. Because I'm using Flexbox, I've set sort of like a minimum-ish size on those flexible items. But I don't really know when this is going to change and when they're going to wrap, because I'm using Flex Wrap as well. So it's an intrinsic layout where I don't know when things are really going to change. The browser's figuring that out for me. And now I have one element that's wrapped. It has the adaptable image, so that image adapts. And the other two that are on the top don't, which is something that you would not be able to do with a media query, no matter how hard you tried, because you're dealing with the same thing in multiple different places. And then the same thing when we get to this size, then all of a sudden they all stack. Now, I thought that was really cool. I really like this. I felt like there was more. There should be more possible. And I kept looking for different ways and trying to force things to work, and nothing was really. I liked that pattern. It was a good pattern. I used it in a few different ways. You can get kind of clever looking for different viewport width breakpoints and stuff. But once again, someone else pointed me in the right direction. In this case, it was Miriam Susan, who replied, or I put a video up on YouTube and looking at one way of doing something, and she replied with an alternative way using container queries. And this was on Mastodon that she put this. And this is the really important part. First, there's the inline size there. It's a logical property. We're going to treat that as a width for all intents and purposes for today. But then there's a calc there. Calc 32ch times 3. This blew my mind. First of all, you can use a calc inside a container query. And yes, you can. You can also use them in media queries if you wanted to. We'll see an example in a minute. But just to compare, once again, if we have a media width greater than 60ch, we're looking at the width of the browser, and we're comparing it to 60ch. The ch unit is characters. It's actually roughly the width of a 0 character at any given font. It will change if you change your font. So I'm saying 60 characters wide. It's actually getting that font size from the browser. It's not getting it from your CSS. So it's basically a fixed number. It's sort of 16 unless the user has changed their user preferences. It's kind of the same as just saying 600 pixels or whatever, putting in a set number. With a container query, very similar, but the 60ch is coming from the size of the container. And this might seem like a really small difference, but it's actually a really important one. So here, once again, I did the red outline thing just so we can see what the container is. And I'm going from, this is basically what Miriam had shown in her post, where we go from stack content to 3 columns. And down here, I'm setting it up with 30ch right there. And actually, for the developers in the audience, you might be saying, why 30ch and not 300 pixels? The designers in the audience might be saying, hey, that's kind of cool, because designers usually know we have like ideal line lengths, minimum and maximum line lengths. So I can actually say that when I have a minimum line length of 30ch for each column, then I'm going to get my columns. And I never have to worry about getting overly squished columns coming in with text that's just too tight. And you can come up with whatever number you want here. This is rough because we have the padding and the gap and stuff that comes into account, so you do have to think about that. But it's kind of nice. And if I come on my HTML here, because font sizes are inherited, because you don't usually change it element by element, but if I change the font size on the body or your HTML, that font size gets inherited, and the breakpoint changes along with it. And everything scales up proportionally. So all of a sudden, we have this smarter layout that's aware of the font size. So you could be using fluid layouts with this as well, using clamp with your font sizes. And this is going to adapt to it. It's really, really cool. And just in case you're wondering, for anybody, with the media query, you could try to do it with a media query. The calc, everything's going to work. The only problem is, again, media queries don't actually see the font size of the thing that you've declared. So you can see it's getting really, really tight here. If I change my font size here, let's make it really big, 1.75, the breakpoint's at the same place. Now I'm breaking my layout. The reason for that is media queries can never see relative font sizes here. So even if you use rem, anything like that, it's looking at the browser setting, because inside a media query, you can redefine your HTML's font size, which could then create circular logic and crash your browser. So they don't let us do that. So there's a good reason for it. So yeah, media queries just don't have this power in the same way that container queries do. They can adapt and create these types of layouts like this. And, oh, one last thing, actually. I wanted to mention something else. I forgot what it was, though. Oh, just here, yeah. With the 30ch times 3, you might be wondering if we could use a variable for that. That would be really nice if we could use a variable, because then you could have the 2 3s set to that variable, and it would just change to whatever you want it to. It's something that we're supposed to have, but no browser's figured it out yet, I guess. So we don't have it yet. But it's something that could potentially come down the line and would be very useful if we could set those as variables. But honestly, it's not that bad doing it like this. And I find it more straightforward than just putting 90ch, because then it feels more magic numbery again. In this case, I can clearly see the connection. Worst case, you put a code in your comment, or comment in your code to let people know what's actually happening. This got me really excited. I was like, holy moly. It's a really simple thing, but all of a sudden, that unlocked a few other things that I'd been struggling with for a really long time, and it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. And it brought me back to this layout that we looked at earlier, where I was struggling in getting this layout to adapt in the way I wanted it to. So in this layout, again, it's an intrinsic layout. I don't really have control over where these breakpoints are happening. The browser's figuring it out for me based on how much space this grid autofit has. So if we just take a really quick look, I have the grid autofit, and then it just has those articles that are in there. So before, what I was trying to do, because I was so trained with how media queries work and this idea of components, that the component should see the size of itself, that I just didn't get my brain to get to this point until I started playing with that pattern that we were just looking at, where I said, well, wait a second, I'm using a min-max here. And this min-max is figuring out where these breakpoints should actually be happening. I updated it from pixels to 25ch in this case. So in my char 25ch minimum column size, and then I get a new column. So I can make that grid autofit into a container just by saying container type inline size. If you're wondering about that, I sort of glossed over it a bit before. Just do this, and that makes your container. There's another option you're basically never going to use. It's just size. This one's like 99% of the use cases is container type inline size. It becomes a container. And again, inline size is left to right most of the time. So here I have a container query that I created that I'm going to turn on. And what I'm saying now is 25ch times 2 for my container, because I know if I can fit 2 columns, because I said minimum column size is 25ch, so when I get to 25 times 2, I now have 2 columns. So when I get there, I can actually span 2 columns all of a sudden. I can change the layout of that featured card. I tried doing this so much with media queries, and it's just magic number disaster that you don't want to try and do, because as soon as you change anything by 1 pixel, the whole thing just collapses. In a situation like this, no matter what I throw at it, this is always going to work. And it's pretty cool that we can do that and have the layout adapt. You'll notice the +1 that was in there, and you might be wondering about that. I'll talk about that in a second. But just for fun, we're going to bring in a little bit of an update here, where maybe when you get to another size, you want it to adapt again. And then so now I'm having it stretch up and down instead, just because I said when I get to 4 columns, I want a different layout. And I'm actually using subgrid now to make sure that my image matches the height of the cards that are on the top, which is kind of cool. I don't have time to dive into how that works, though. Sorry. So yeah, here I'm just saying 25ch times 4, and because that's when I know I have 4 columns. Now you'll notice the +3, the other one at the top had a +1. See if you can think about why I might be doing that. There's a good reason. And this is where variables would be really, really, really nice in our media queries and container queries. But it's because when I have 4 columns, I have 1, 2, 3 gaps. And each one of my gaps is 1 rem in size, because that's what I declared higher up. So you do have to take the gap into account for this to actually work. Variables would... I'm waiting for the day. But I still find the fact that I can do this really, and a quick comment again in your code just makes that connection and makes everything work really well. Again, the one problem there would be if you do have different sizes that are coming for your gaps. Like if you adjust your gap at different sizes, you'd have to repeat however you're doing it, which could be annoying. There's one limitation to this, or one thing that might look a little bit worrisome. And what that is what happens if you have a card, and in this case, let's just look really fast. It's up here. My card, I did it in a bit of a contrived way instead of just putting a class of featured card. So I said card has a direct image, or direct child, it's an image, and it's also the first child. What if I had a card somewhere else that meets that type of thing? Or maybe you just did a featured card class like a sane person would have done. And then you could potentially run into the same issue, though, where if I take this, and let's just say for fun, I put it at the very top of my section. And I don't want this card to belong as part of that layout. And so for this card at the top, it's kind of cool, the layout's changing, but it's broken a little bit with that because I don't have subgrid anymore. The layout doesn't, maybe I don't want that breakpoint. I only want this, and like those numbers become magic numbers if I'm using this outside of the context of my grid autofit. So some people might have noticed where here on my container type, above that I have a container name, and you can name your containers. So I can actually come in here, and when I declare my @container, I can say grid auto fit, and those styles only will apply if the container query evaluates as true and it's in something with a grid auto fit in there. So now you can see that one at the top is kind of broken because it doesn't have any changes happening, whereas the one at the bottom is now spreading across 2 layouts. So I can make these things without having to have some weird modifier classes necessarily. I can keep all the styles for this thing all together in one space and still define the different areas where these different changes could be happening without having 10 different, again, whether you're using a modifier class or you're doing it in a different way. But then I can just use the component wherever I need to use it, and it's going to adapt, instead of having to place it in there and then read through my code base to figure out what the modifier class that I need is. In the long run, you're creating something that's a lot more robust because it's just going to work when you're using them in situations you've accounted for. And that's really, to me, really, really exciting. Yes. Nothing else to say on that one. Now, we get to the part that I'm really excited about. This does involve a little bit more modern CSS that's not as well supported, just so you know. But it's making a lot more things that are really exciting possible. It's continuing off of this idea of container queries, where it's part of the new spec for style queries. Anybody hear style queries? Ooh, good. That's exciting. So style queries build on top of media queries. They're available in Chrome, and they shipped in the latest version of Safari. So browser support's probably at like 71, 72. They're probably not ready for production, but you can start thinking about different things you could do with this. Here's a layout that I was working on for a project. It's for a course of mine, actually. And simply, it was this thing, and it was used across, it was for a blog. It was used across a whole bunch of pages where I had some columns of content. But when we got to narrower sizes, especially for mobile, we turned it in, we didn't want them to get squished. We didn't really want them to stack. It looked kind of cool if we could just have like an overflow grid. So I called it overflow grid, where we go left to right instead. And this works nice, much better on mobile than desktop, obviously. But we wanted some horizontal scrolling for that. And this worked on every single page except for one specific situation. And that one specific situation, it worked 50% of the time, which was really annoying. And I'm sure you've run into situations like that, where you've made this perfect solution, and then you get some random curveball thrown at you, and you're just really mad at it, whoever came up with whatever you're doing. So here, oh, I already had something in my CSS that I didn't think I had. We're going to turn that off really fast. I don't know what I did. Oh, it's right here. Cool. Spoiler. Awesome. So here, I have the same component in this section and down here. They work exactly the same way. There's no difference. I just copied-pasted it, basically, into this upper area. But in the upper area, what I've done, if we come take a look in the HTML first, is I have this hero class that's up here with the split. The split is the exact same one I showed you before, where when it's wide enough, we go up to 2 columns. But when we got to 2 columns, it looks kind of weird with this horizontal scroller up there. Everywhere else, in every other situation, this worked perfectly. But this is being set up with a container query. And the problem with this container query that we'd set up, if we go take a look, overflow grid, I have a bit of custom property usage in here. So the grid auto flow is what's making it go left to right, that's right there. And then when we get to the container larger than 900 pixels, that's when we don't have the side scrolling anymore. We just get 4 columns that are set up, which worked, again, absolutely everywhere I was using it, except for this one spot up here because it got smaller, and because it's a container query and we're getting smaller, we're using the small version of it, and it's giving me the horizontal scrolling that I don't actually want to have. I was so frustrated. And then I thought, well, what I could do is use one thing up here. So actually, I have to comment something else out really fast to get, we're going to comment this out. What we could do is I could come inside where I have this split class here. Some people are going to love this, some people are going to hate this, but I'm going to come inside the container query. I'm going to do an ampersand hero. This is with nesting. The ampersand is a placeholder for split. So if you nest, and nesting is part of native CSS now. I don't know what the browser support is off the top of my head, I apologize, but it's in all the browsers. So if I say ampersand.hero, it's looking for anything that has a class of both hero and split. The reason this is kind of cool is because I'm using it within this container query, I'm only modifying the hero when we go, like when we change into this container query, so when it hits this one spot and only that one spot. You could definitely split this off into 2 bits of code if you wanted to, but then you'd have to repeat the container query, which is kind of annoying. So I sort of like nesting for this use case here. And because I set it up with custom properties, overflow grid direction, got to spell things right, direction. I could change this. I'm going to get it wrong, aren't I? I always mix up row and column. It was row that I wanted. Told you I'd get it wrong. No. Ah, overflow, thank you. Overflow grid direction. And now I probably have the wrong one again. No, there we go. Now they stacked. The reason they're stacking is this is just a really simple thing, and I'm sure people have done this, where you're toggling, you switch something on a container or on a custom property just because you want to tweak something. That's why custom properties are so nice. They're really easy to tweak. You could even do this with JavaScript if you wanted to, right? That's the beauty of custom properties. But then if we come down here, and the reason this is working is this grid auto flow. It looks a little bit contrived with how I set it up. It was something from Leia Veru here. But anyway, it used to be column. Just look. The first line there, it was column, and then my grid auto flow became row, so they stacked. But the problem is there's other styles that I need to overwrite too. When I do that, I want to overwrite my this grid auto columns. The grid auto columns is what's controlling the size of the columns. And right now, those columns, they're too small. And this is, well, I guess a modifier class could work for that, but then I need a modifier class that's also inside this container. Well, I can't change a class inside of a container or media query. That just doesn't work. And then again, you'd come in with this way of figuring it out and getting it only to apply in this one thing, and it would bloat your code a little bit and be kind of annoying. So instead of that, I used a style query because I knew they're possible. And this is why I'm so excited about them. So a style query looks like a container query. It is at container. Very important with a style query, style query. So it's at container, and then you have a style function, and you put the name of your custom property. In the future, this should work with any property value pair. Right now, it only works with custom properties in the browsers that it's supported by. So I can say that my style, grid overflow direction is row, and I can come in with new styles. People that use Sass, sort of like a mix-in a little bit. Mix-ins are sort of coming to, or there's a proposal, and it builds on top of this idea. And what this means is, when I have a grid overflow direction of row, I'm going to change a few of the other properties as well. And this becomes really, really cool, because now I can conditionally switch the styling, and now I'm getting the overflow direction going the other way. And I don't need to find some contrived way to do that in the media query. As long as I'm toggling that overflow grid direction on or off, it's going to happen anywhere. So right now, I'm only doing it inside this media query, but I could come and I could change, or container query, I should say. I could change this up here instead, and then everywhere it's going to apply. So even in this section, I'm getting the scrolling go up and down. So it becomes this whole set of code, and I only did 2 lines of CSS. You could have as much styling as you want that you're conditionally applying on or off based on the value of a custom property. And you could have 10 different things looking at different options here, and there's things outside of layout as well. I'm only looking at layout at the moment. But I'm going to leave this in here. And the other thing is these are inherited properties, which is really good, because I'm not applying this directly on the container. Maybe I am. But you don't have to apply it directly on the container. Because custom properties are inherited, you can have it on any parent, and that's going to come in And so you can toggle things at different levels without having to need more and more selectors along the way. And just to show you one other thing that's also possible is I did the same thing with my card layout, where I made an alternative layout. So again, it's only in my container query where now the title of the card is on the side instead of being on top. Let's just toggle that off so you can see it. They stack, and then I can toggle it on. So I'm completely changing the layout of my card with a style query lower down that I created. And I'm doing that only within a media or a container query, and this would work in a media query as well if you wanted it to, which is super cool because I'm conditionally toggling something on or off depending on the situation wherever I want it. Without having, normally you'd have an alternative layout with with another class, but then you can't choose when you're using that or not using it without having to inject it with JavaScript to detect when the page size changes. Maybe there's other ways you could do it, but this, I don't know. I really like this. I was very excited by this, and I think it's really, really exciting. And the thing with all of this, while I think it's really, really powerful, I also think that there's probably a lot more that you can do with this. As I said, I've sort of went through this journey on myself, figuring out things from other people along the way. So if it wasn't for Andy, I wouldn't have thought about that viewport trick and then started using it in my projects. And then the thing from Miriam worked really well for my column switching. But then I also figured out from what she did there how I could use it in that intrinsic layout and get things to start changing there. And I'm really hoping by showing you some of these things, and this is whether you're coding or if you're a developer, just knowing that, hey, these things are possible, would this other thing be possible as well, and trying it out and seeing if it works. Because that's always the cool part of this, and why I love having my YouTube channel, is seeing all the things that people, they watch a video and then they reply with a better version of what I did. That's always the greatest thing in the world. So please, if you have any cool ideas, you had any thoughts, try and experiment, play, and see what's actually possible with them. And when you're doing all of this, just remember that while these two things do look really, really similar when you first look at them, once you start using them in new ways, a lot of their potential starts to come through. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Excellent, wow. You must be dreaming CSS, don't you?
More or less,
you
sometimes.
can all see. I mean, wow, this is really impressive to see like this calc in container queries. I mean, like, oh, okay, something is moving here, so that's impressive. Questions? One of them is, came from me. I have to bring it up right away. Kevin, in being honest and sincere, it's a safe space here, right? What's your take on Tailwind?
That's not nice. Don't ask me that. No. Can I give my usual answer?
You can give both, the usual and not so usual.
My usual answer is that I get why people like it, but it's not for me. My main concern...
Did you hear that? It's like the suspense in the room.
Yeah.
Okay.
My main issue sometimes with CodePen is that it encourages an over-componentization of things. It's like, if you're using utility classes, it makes sense if you're using it on a component, because then you don't have to reuse the things again. So I deal a lot with beginners and new people coming in, and they see all of these people using Tailwind. They're writing regular HTML, but they're using Tailwind, and it becomes a disaster because then they're just repeating the same classes everywhere, and it's not you're not getting an advantage from Tailwind necessarily in that situation.
Yeah.
And then they also rely on it a bit. They don't understand CSS well enough, and it's just another way to author CSS.
Yeah.
So if you understand CSS really well, you'll be better at using Tailwind.
Yeah, I think in my experience it's been a bit strange because, of course, when you see it look on Tailwind, there is an option to kind of plug styles in with @apply. But I mean, maybe that's just me, but in my experience, a lot of people who are using Tailwind are extremely allergic to the notion of bringing up @apply because it goes against the very principle of Tailwind. Yeah. And so you cannot, I mean, you could have potentially both, like nice, clean HTML and, Tailwind, but in reality, it looks different. Yeah. Right? So I don't know if it's, looking at people, I guess. I sense something. Well, but also what was really impressive, just to see how far we've come in terms of nesting and this kind of idea of actually being able to do what we used to do with Sass, but then you don't need to, again, as you mentioned, repeat container queries. Yep. That's really nice. So where does it leave Sass then?
That's a really good question. I get asked that a lot. I personally still use Sass a lot on my larger projects that I do. But I also say, whenever somebody asks me that, I say it really depends on what you're using it for. Some people only use it for nesting. You don't really need it in that case. I still like it for mix-ins. I use loops to generate stuff with maps and other stuff. So as long as that's not in CSS, I'll continue using it, especially for bigger things. Even though the way I use it's a little bit different, just because I can rely on a lot of more modern things. But I map variables to custom properties and stuff, so I can use the custom property because there's advantages to those. So yeah, I think it's adjusted it, and I do think that for a lot of people in different use cases, it's probably reduced the amount of people who are using it just because those features, if the features are in native CSS, you might as well use the native one. They're probably more powerful.
There is a question from Brian. Maybe you can help here. Container queries and position fixed.
Actually, that's a good one of the. I mentioned there's limitations with container queries. They do create a new stacking context, which I'll let Josh explain tomorrow. But if you don't know what stacking context is, but basically it can cause problems if the way things stack, or stacking context, but it's also a new containing block. So for positioned stuff, you're sort of stuck positioned within the container. The same way if you do a position relative and then you add a z index, you can position your element. With fixed, anytime someone wants something that's fixed, and they're having issues when it comes to the containing block, I always say, why is it in that thing that has the container? If it's fixed, it probably is more of a global thing. Like if it's a back to top button or it's your nav or something like that. The only time I've run into issues with it on that was actually because I had my header declared as a container type. And then I had my nav sticky, so I had to rework a little bit of stuff to actually make it work. So there are some times you might run into a little sticking point, but if it's position fixed and it's something you can pull out of the container, that's usually what I would do.
The question was specifically about container queries make using position fixed elements hard to position correctly due to the shifting origin. Any tips there?
Yeah, so I think that could potentially just come down, again, to the fundamental understanding of what creates a containing block. So again, that's position relative z index. You have a new containing block. Then we do our top, bottom, left, and right. We're not doing it to the page, but that position absolute thing is moving within the parent or whatever, the nearest ancestor that has positioning. So just being aware that if you create something as a container, that's created a containing block. So there are some times that might cause a problem. I will say one potential fix for that, depending on, I don't know the use case in this example, anchor positioning is going to be really, really awesome. And it just means your thing you could have an element at the very bottom of your markup that you could position relative to another element on your page. Yeah. So that might come back to fix that. But again, it really depends on how you're using it in the situation.
Custom drop-downs.
They're coming. It's exciting. I should have mentioned that.
More.
Yeah,
yes.
So I don't know where they're at, but we have a select, and they're making a new one. And I know there was debate on whether it should be a new one. Actually, it was Brad mentioned OpenUI this morning. So it was them who've pioneered this whole thing to happen, where it's select menu instead, I think is the name they're on.
Select menu, yeah.
And it's a select that's fully stylable. You can do whatever you want with it, and it's really cool. And I'm looking forward to it actually becoming usable. So
you look at all these little things like the custom checkbox, the custom select, and all these things. And we've always been using these weird hacks around like pseudo element, like before and after, and all the things. And it always looked, really?
Yeah.
That's how we do that, and I'm really happy to see that it's actually moving along. I mean, actually, in this entire world of all these new shiny CSS features and all, what are you really excited about? What's very high on your agenda? That's not here yet, maybe, or maybe that's already here.
Honestly, it shifts all the time because whenever I start playing with something new, I get really excited about it. But anchor positioning is probably close to the top. Which I've mentioned a few times now if you haven't seen it. Anybody who's used tooltip libraries to line up your tooltip where you need it to be, that's just going to be native in CSS and really easy to do. You can play with it in Chrome. The other thing that I love right now, it's here-ish, depending on how you care about browser support, but scroll-driven animations. If ever you use intersection observers to trigger animations and other stuff, the stuff you can do with just CSS now on that front is so powerful and really cool. Just look up like CodePen demos of it. I was using it in like the most traditional way possible of like, oh, I'm going to slide an image in, or I had a nav that can change background color when you've gone far enough down. And then some of the stuff that people are coming up with now of like the creative ways that you can use it, it's really, really cool.
So are we done with CSS now?
Once they put in,
is there something on your wish list?
Yeah, variables in those media queries, please.
I mean, that's like really going all the way niche, like all the way. Yeah. There are a couple of questions, and just to wrap up, well, that was expected. When is the CSS battles coming back?
Oh yeah, they're coming back. It's hard. I have to organize it, but well, it depends on which. If you mean where I do it by myself, I guess I could do one soon. If it's with somebody else, I have to organize one. But they just added a new feature where you can actually battle someone else in real time. So I need to check that out.
Mm-hmm. And Hugh is wondering, so what's your CSS battle win percentage?
Sorry, my battle with percentage?
Yeah, winning percentage.
Oh, 0. But I don't. When I do CSS battles, I never try and get a high score because I can't do that. I don't know who's familiar with CSS battles, but you basically have to solve something in the least amount of characters as possible. And it's full of hacks and things that when I look at it, I'm just like, well, that's interesting. So I try and solve them as fast as possible and don't care about how many characters I use.
So maybe just a final question that just came in from JC. As frameworks like Material UI become more popular due to the widespread use of React and Angular, do you worry that developers might rely too heavily on those libraries and miss out on utilizing the full range of modern CSS features?
That's a really good question. It's something that I've thought about, and I don't have a good answer for that. I am a little bit concerned with that. And the other thing that I look at is with all of these new modern features that are coming along is just like things like container queries where it's a little bit, having a generic ones built in doesn't really work in the same way as far as I'm concerned. Like you want it linked with the sizing of something else, or like, I don't know, it's a bit more based on what you need. But even other things like subgrid, and like it's really hard to make something using those features that just works within these systems, I find. With these new features that are coming as CSS is getting more robust and more powerful, I just wonder if they're going to get integrated in or not, actually, yeah. Because even for them to bring all of these things in there, that just makes it so much more maintenance on their own end, too. And if there's not this really big benefit for doing it for a large audience, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the things get left by the wayside a little bit. Hopefully not.
But the future does look bright, right?
For CSS, I think it couldn't be brighter, yeah. I'm super excited.
Well, that gives us some hope and optimism, I think. All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Kane, for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.